I'm Rabbi David Ben Eliyahu. I'm 60 years old, and for nearly 3 decades, I sat across from people drowning in debt and told them the same thing: spend less, save more, be disciplined. I believed that, I taught that, and I was partly right, but I was missing something. Something I found buried in a contract on a Tuesday afternoon. Something the bank hoped I would never read. What I found that day changed everything I thought I knew about debt. And when I show it to you, I think it will change something for you too. Comment below right now. Type, "I accept my wealth," because what I'm about to share is not theory. It is a hidden mechanism that is legally draining money from millions of people who are doing everything right. Let me tell you what happened. Her name was Miriam. She was a school teacher in my congregation in Brooklyn. Mid-50s, modest apartment, no extravagant habits. She cooked at home. She didn't travel. She drove a car that was 12 years old. And yet every month, she came a little closer to the edge. She came to me one evening after services, quiet and ashamed. She told me she had been making minimum payments on a credit card for 4 years. The balance had barely moved. "Rabbi," she said, "I don't understand what I'm doing wrong." And honestly, sitting there, neither did I. I looked at her life. There was nothing to cut. She was already living with discipline. I told her I would look into it. I told her to bring me the paperwork. She brought me everything, the statements, the notices, and then she slid a document across my desk that I had never actually read before, not in full. The original credit card agreement. You see, most of us, when we sign for credit, we read the summary, the interest rate, the minimum payment, maybe the annual fee. We do not read the full document. It is long. It is written in language designed to exhaust you. That is not an accident. I started at the top, and I read every word. It took me a long time, and somewhere around page 7 I stopped. There it was, a clause, not hidden exactly, because it was printed right there, but buried in the density of language that most people never reach. It said, in effect, that the lender reserved the right to change the terms of the agreement, including the interest rate, the fee structure, and certain payment conditions, at any time, with notice delivered to the cardholder's address on file. And if the cardholder continued to use the account after receiving that notice, the new terms would be considered accepted. Let me say that again in plain language. The bank could raise your interest rate at any time, for nearly any reason. And if you kept using your card, which most people do because they need to, you had legally agreed to the new terms. You see, Miriam's rate had been quietly adjusted upward twice in 4 years. She had received a notice in the mail each time. She had not understood what it meant. She had kept using her card, and now she was paying an interest rate significantly higher than the one she thought she had signed for. Now I want to tell you something important here, because I want you to understand why this disturbed me so deeply. In Jewish law, in the tradition I have studied my entire life, there is a principle called kinyan. It governs how a legal agreement becomes binding. For a kinyan to be valid, both parties must fully understand what they are agreeing to. There must be clear, informed consent, not just a signature, genuine comprehension. This principle exists because the rabbis understood something about human nature, that confusion and pressure can produce signatures that do not represent real agreement. What I found in Miriam's contract was, in spirit, the inversion of Kinyan. The terms had changed. She had not been clearly informed in language she could understand, and the mechanism that counted as her consent, simply continuing to use a card she depended on, was at best a legal fiction. The bank knew this. They designed it this way. I brought the contract to an attorney. A friend of mine, I will call him Eli, who had spent 20 years in consumer finance law. I sat down in his office, put the document on his desk, and pointed to that clause. And Eli looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Not surprised, tired. He said, "David, this clause is in almost every credit card agreement in the country. It is perfectly legal, and almost no one ever challenges it." He told me that the law permits lenders to include such provisions as long as they provide notice. But he also told me something else. He told me that before the first payment is made, before the account has any payment history, there is a window, a narrow but real window, in which a borrower has the most leverage to negotiate, to dispute, or to request modified terms in writing. Most people never know this window exists. By the time they start asking questions, they have already made dozens of payments, and the terms have calcified. I went back to my files. I started reviewing contracts that other members of my congregation had brought me over the years. Documents I had glanced at but never read fully. Mortgage agreements, auto loan contracts, a student loan document from a young man who had come to me 3 years earlier, frustrated that his balance seemed to grow even when he paid faithfully. And there it was, in each one, a version of the same architecture. Variable rate clauses that could shift based on an index the borrower had never heard of. Fee provisions that could activate under circumstances described in language so vague it was almost meaningless. Escalation clauses that borrowers had signed without understanding they were signing them. This was not coincidence. This was a pattern. And the pattern had a purpose: to ensure that the lender retained maximum flexibility while the borrower remained locked in maximum obligation. This made me angry, not at my congregants, at myself. For how many years had I counseled people on discipline and habit when the structure itself was tilted against them? There was a young couple, I will call them Daniel and Rachel. They came to me 3 years after buying their first home. They were not in crisis, but they were confused. Their mortgage payment had increased by nearly $400 a month. They had not missed payments. They had not refinanced. Nothing in their life had changed, except a number buried in their loan documents tied to an adjustable rate index. They had signed a variable rate mortgage. They had been told at the closing that the introductory rate was fixed for 3 years. What they had not fully absorbed, and what their loan officer had not clearly explained, was that after those 3 years, the rate would adjust annually based on an index that could, in certain economic conditions, increase substantially. They had a right to that information. They had signed a document that contained that information, but the information had not been delivered in a way they could truly understand. Daniel told me, "Rabbi, I read what they gave me. I just didn't know what I was reading." That is the problem. That is precisely the problem. I want to tell you what happened with Miriam, because her story does not end with that document on my desk. After I read her contract and understood what had been done, I helped her prepare for a phone call with her lender. This is something most people do not know. You can call. You can ask. You can use specific language that signals to the lender that you understand your rights and that you are prepared to exercise them. Miriam called her credit card company. She was polite. She was calm. She referenced the original agreement. She asked, not demanded, asked, to speak with someone in the retention or account review department. She explained that she had been a customer in good standing, that her rate had been adjusted twice, and that she wished to discuss whether a rate modification was possible. She did not threaten. She did not argue. She simply asked in informed language. They lowered her rate, not dramatically, but measurably, enough to change the trajectory of her debt. The lender did not do this out of kindness. They did it because a borrower who understands the contract is a different kind of borrower. That phone call cost her nothing. The ignorance of it had cost her thousands. Now let me bring this back to something older, something that was understood long before credit cards existed. In the Torah, there is a concept called Shemitah, the sabbatical year, observed every seventh year, in which debts were released. Not renegotiated, released. The borrower was freed. This was not charity, it was structure. It was an acknowledgement that debt, left unchecked and unbounded, becomes a form of servitude. The rabbis understood that debt must have limits, time limits, ethical limits, human limits. What modern lending has done is remove every limit from the lender's side while preserving every obligation on the borrower's side. The borrower is bound. The lender is free to adjust, to escalate, to change. The Shemitah principle does not exist in your credit agreement, but the spirit of it can exist in how you approach that agreement, if you know what to look for. So let me give you what I should have given Miriam 4 years earlier. 3 things: concrete, specific, do them. First, find the change in terms clause. It is in your credit card agreement, possibly your mortgage, possibly your auto loan. Read it. It will tell you under what conditions your lender can change the terms. Understanding this clause tells you how much protection you actually have, and how little most borrowers realize they have. Second, before you make your first payment on any new debt, you have leverage. Use it. Write a letter, not an email, a written letter, to the lender requesting confirmation of fixed terms or requesting a fixed rate addendum. This does not always succeed, but it establishes a record. It signals that you are an informed borrower. Lenders respond differently to informed borrowers. Third, if your rate has already been changed, if you received a notice you didn't fully understand and continued using the account, you can still call. Request a rate review. Reference your payment history. Use the word retention. Ask to speak to someone with authority to modify your account. This is a conversation millions of people never have, not because it won't work, but because they don't know it's possible. If you are watching this and you are in debt, whether it is credit card debt or a mortgage or a car payment, I want you to hear this. The debt itself is not your failure. You were given a contract designed to favor the lender. You were given language designed to confuse. You signed because you trusted, because you needed, because you did not know there was something specific to look for. That is not weakness. That is what happens when one party to a contract understands it and the other does not. But now you have something you didn't have before. You have the question, and the question is the beginning of everything. Go find your agreements. Read page 7. Read the whole thing. Ask someone to read it with you if you need to. The clause is there, and now you know what to do with it. If this teaching reached you today, I want you to do something right now. Type, "I accept my wealth" in the comments below, because that declaration is not about arrogance. It is about claiming the right to understand what you sign, to protect what you earn, and to stop being separated from your money by language you were never taught to read. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because every week I bring teachings like this one, practical, grounded in tradition, and designed to give you real tools. Share this video with someone who is struggling with debt and blaming themselves for it. They may be blaming the wrong thing. And if you have a story, if you've found something buried in a contract, if you've negotiated with a lender and won, if you've discovered something you wish you'd known sooner, there is a form in the description. Fill it out. Your story may be the teaching someone else needs. Here is what I know after 60 years. A contract you do not understand is not a contract in any meaningful sense. It is a signature on a document written by someone else for someone else's benefit. Read what you sign. Ask what you don't understand. And never let anyone tell you that the fine print doesn't matter, because the people who wrote it are counting on you believing that. Shalom.